So I'm getting cobalt blue out, just a little bit, and we know cobalt blue stays very light. I might even do 2 of them. Here's a very watered down version of cobalt blue. This one's a little bit more concentrated. Sometimes it's nice to have 2 of the puddles. And then I have used my wonderful opera rose, which I happen to love. So,
Yeah, it's a pretty color.
and did I use quinacridone red also? I can't remember.
Yes.
Yeah, I thought
Just
so.
a teensy bit.
A teensy
little
bit,
bit.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. So I'm also going to give myself a couple of puddles here. And then another thing, well, maybe it's a little early to do it, but at some point we're going to use the permanent rose for when we're going to darken some areas. But right now we're kind of staying lighter. You know, in watercolor we paint from light to dark. So we don't want to go too dark yet, too early. We just want to get kind of the first layer on, and then we're going to build the darks to kind of make it more dramatic when we have everything painted. That's my plan. So, but yeah, that's in general, I mean, watercolor, if you want to be traditional, you go from light to dark, and we save our whites. The white of the paper is going to be the white. We don't paint with white. However, sometimes, you know, things can happen and you lost your white, and then we'll break the rules. So there. So I painted these little buds that were kind of out of focus, and I painted this bud here, which is more in focus, so you can see I gave that one more detail, right? This has detail where you can see kind of like the individual petals, and here you can't really see that. And then we started this bloom here, and I painted 1 petal. We cannot paint 2 areas. I mean, we can, but it's gonna not be a very good experience. We don't want to paint 2 areas next to each other when one of them is still wet, because then they're gonna run together. The pigment runs wherever there is water, whether you want it to or not. So that's how that works. So I think I want to go with maybe a little bit of a bigger brush. Do we want to go with a bigger brush? Yeah, I do want to go with a bigger brush. I like to paint with as big a brush as I can and still get the job done. So now I painted this petal. Now I'm going to paint this petal. And so basically what I like to do on the flowers here is I like to paint the individual petals one at a time. I could also have gone in and then just given all the petals a very, 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 very light coat of pink, and then let that dry, and then I could go in and divide it up. But I kind of tend to like this method better. So water inside. I don't go all the way out to the edges. Just leave myself like a millimeter, like I don't know what that would be, a 1/16 of an inch, something like that. Just so it's not go all the way out to where as far as I want the pigment, because the water does move a little tiny bit, and plus I can't really see as well, since the water is clear, I can't see as well where I'm at. Whereas once I have pigment on, I can see it much easier, right? So I'm gonna go in and get a little tiny bit of that opera rose on the tip of my brush, and if I have any little droplets on the shaft, I try to take them off. And then I start at the bottom of the petal, because I know that's always going to be the darkest part of it. Not that this is dark by any stretch of the imagination. And then I'm just going to drag it up here, and you can see how it flows where it hits the water, and it stays put where it hits the dry paper. So here I'm just giving it a little bit of the color. Here we are.
Any part of your petal dry?
No, only out to the edges. I mean the edges, you know, I don't make, so you can see this little dry out there. So that's where I go in, and then with the tip of my brush, I can just perfect that line now at this point. And so now, that's already looking pretty good. I like to have the little, it's a little lighter right there in the middle, which means that the petal looks like it's kind of curving up a little bit, which is perfect. Now I still have a little bit of that pink on, and now I'm just gonna dip the very, very tip of the brush into a little tiny bit of my cobalt blue, and I'm going to run that in right down here because I want to push it down a little tiny bit there, and both darker and then cooler, that'll push things down. And I'm leaving this side of the petal very light because I want to tell you that this petal is on top of that petal. Can you see that? That it comes forward then. Light comes forward, dark goes down or away from us. So I think I'll just leave it like that for now. It's kind of a little wimpy, but it's okay. So then I think I can probably paint this one over here. So I'll do one more for you, and then it's all going to be the same for all the petals pretty much. And so I'll just do the same thing. I'm going to wet here inside the petal. And you can see my brush strokes are in the direction of the petal. So it's almost as if I'm doing my brush strokes as if I was already painting it. I find, first of all, it's kind of like, you know, so that you kind of get the practice of how it's going to go. And more importantly, it's going to, if the brush strokes show up later, I have a little pink on here, a little of the Opera Rose, show up later, they're going to show up in the right direction and not kind of in a weird direction where you're like, what? I never want my viewers to go, what? I want them to know what it is, even if I've just given them a little tiny bit of information about what it actually is. So here and here, I'm going to do it like this. And can you see now I'm leaving a little bit of a white area here because there's a little curve in the petal right there. And I'm thinking that could be because it has a little fold, kind of goes up a little bit, or a little undulation. Again, I have a little bit of pink still on my brush, and I'm just going to dip the very, very, very tip of the brush into that cobalt blue to kind of give it a little bit of that lavender feel. And I can even go in and maybe, why don't I go in and do a little bit of the quinacridone red. Let's see what happens. Whew. If it was too much, I think it's a little too much. I just cleaned out my brush and then dragged it there. I'm going to leave it like that, I think. There. So there's that. Let me show you this little bud if you didn't see me do that little bud. Now this one's a tiny little bud. OMG. So let me see. What do you look like? Okay. I can see it. So it's like it has, so you almost need to look at our drawing here. So there's a little kind of the center of the, oops, let me try not to put my hand in my wet petal. So there is a little, like you're peeking into the absolute, the kind of like the inside of the bud, and that would be a little darker. So I'm going to dip into, and now I'm going to do it on dry. So I'm going to give this a little bit of pink in here. It's like that. And I might even, for fun, take a little bit of the quinacridone red and then just even dab it in to give it a little bit more oomph. You see that? Mm-hmm. So now I got the center painted, but so I can't paint those little petals that are wrapping around it, but I can paint this outside, and in my view, that would be, let me rinse my brush. Maybe I should take a little bit of a smaller brush, even though I'm doing okay with that, since it's not a very big area. I forgot to get out my yellow. As we know, yours truly, she's not a big believer of green on your palette. She is a big believer in making her poor students make their own. So that's where I'm coming from. So I'm going to put a little bit of yellow on, because yellow is kind of half of green. What do I mean by that? That's a very weird way of saying it. What it is a green is not a primary color. It consists of two of the primary colors, yellow, which I just put on, and the other color. And you can see here I mixed in, you know, I had basically rinsed out my pinks here, a little bit of the blue, so it's a little bit, but you know, now I rinsed out the yellow. You can see it went more peach colored. And if you just have yellow and red, you get orange, but I shouldn't talk too much. I should just get going here. I'm going to go and take a little bit of the cobalt blue on my brush, dab it here, and then while this is still wet, the yellow is still very wet, and see, I'm just dabbing in a little bit of that cobalt, and magic happens. All of a sudden, I have green. And it's a very nice springy light green that I happen to like. I'm thinking it should be a little bit darker maybe on this side because it's away from the light. So then I just went back in, got a little bit more of the blue one. And I think we can probably see, at least we can now, it's my flower, I can do what I want, right? We can see a little bit of that, one of those cover petals right there, and maybe a little bit even down here. I'm just making it up as I go. All right, I like it. So now I have to let that dry. Maybe you can even do a little bit. See? It's kind of like when you're painting. Sometimes the painting will tell you stuff, and you should always listen. So this one said it wanted some more of these green ones. So I'm giving it to it. But see how it's already kind of, now it gives it a little dimension. See that very yellow-green there? That's the light's hitting it. And it brings it forward from that other petal. And so later you'll see me go in, once we have color on everything, you'll see me go in and darkening little areas. And that would definitely be an area I would darken, is that side of the petal underneath, because that's going to really push out this little bud. So I can't do any more on this one. I'll leave it alone and I'll finish it so you can see it. And then in the meantime, I'm going to go around to all my flowers and put the first layer of color on. And I'm going to try and give a little variance so they're not like this one got kind of flat. So this one, you see this one is not nearly as interesting as some of the other ones I did. But it doesn't matter, I can go in and do that afterwards. But I usually like to try and get as much in as I can the first go around. So there'll be some petal painting in your future. Okay, so I'm going to finish this little bud, and then I'm going to show you how I work with these little turnovers. You can see I painted in the first coat on them, and here's another one that actually has a little turnover. I'm going to show you how to do it. They're not hard at all once you kind of know what you need to put on. So let me just do this little bud that I didn't quite finish. So I'm going to just use a smaller brush. I'm doing it on dry, and then I'm going in here at the bottom of this little guy, in that little corner there, and putting a little bit of pigment and dragging it out like that. Can you see that?
Is that Opera Rose?
Opera Rose, and then it's make it a little bit darker with the quinacridone red. And then I'm just kind of pulling the color out. So it's darkest down there, and I can even do it a little bit more, adapt in while it was still wet. And then I can find another little corner. It's almost like little triangles. Put a little bit of pigment in that one, rinse out my brush.
This one here.
And then I'm just going to slowly just drag it out so that it's a little bit
No,
lighter there. And just a little bit more here. So now there's a little color on the whole thing, has a little bit more shape. I'm not completely finished with it, but that's as far as I can get with it right now. And you know, I could totally leave it like that. Nobody says I would have to do more to it, but I want to do more to it. All right, so then let's look at some of these. Like here is a little tiny bit of a turnover here. Not very much, just a short little edge. And I didn't do anything about it. I just painted over it as if it didn't exist. You can totally do that. Or sometimes you can stop before, like here, stop before. See, there's another, see that little white edge I have there? That's another turnover that I'm going to make. Very narrow one. So there's, you can either paint over them and ignore them the first time around, or you can paint them in two sections. Like here I painted this one, let it dry, and then I painted that section, the turnover. Turnovers or folds, whatever you want to call them, they're like this, right? And so this part catches light. As it goes away, it gets darker, and underneath it is dark, right? Because it's casts a little shadow. So to bring them out is not very hard. You just take some more of that color you have. So I am using the Opera Rose mixed in with a little bit of the quinacridone red, and I might even take a little tiny bit of blue and put in, so I get a little bit of a slightly darker, a little bit duller pink. And then now I'm just going in and I'm making this even more dramatic by painting in a little bit here like that. And then right away, before it dries on me, I got to get a damp brush. It's just damp, not dripping wet. And I just get the tip into the pigment I deposited and I lose that edge. That's, you know, losing the edge is a very important watercolor technique. Can you see how that already then says much more? It brings that little tip out. And then the other thing that happens is, I want to do it a little bit brighter on the outside since I started that way, is then on the outside edge where it's turning over, it's actually also a little bit darker, right? Because it's kind of going away from the light. So I'm going to get, and I did it even more on this side because the light's coming from here. So I'm thinking this side of it will be a little lighter. It's just being extra. So I put a little bit on there, pigment like that. And then you got to be fast. Can't be, you know, having a tea break in the middle of this. You got to go in and with a damp, clean brush, just get the tip in to that pigment and then just gently kind of drag it out. And then after a little while, you'll have a lot of pigment on your brush. You need to rinse it again and dab it. And then you can continue until you're satisfied that that edge is looking the way you want it. And there's no like outline. Can you see that?
That was my trouble. Yeah, I hadn't learned
I'm
that
having a
yet.
problem with the outline.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Losing the edge is the whole
losing
key
the-
there. Not your mind, I always like to say. Don't lose your mind, just the edge. Now here I can go in again now that it's dry and I can kind of separate those outer petals a little bit more. So I'm just going to get a little bit of pigment on, and that's against a reddish pink, whatever color you're using here. Can you see I'm kind of separating there a little bit? These two, so now there's a little bit more of an edge there. Can you see? I separate it. And then I can separate one more. So I can put a little bit of maybe here, like there, and then just drag it out there. Can you see how it gets more and more shape when you do that? And I could also do it with the greens. So right now they're kind of running all together. That's not really how I want it. So I'm going to do another. So I'm still going to just use the cobalt blue and then a little bit of the yellow. And I'm mixing myself a green on the palette. Just a little tiny from the green and cobalt blue. I don't need it super dark. And then here, oops, that was way too much. But like that. Can you see? By even just putting that in now, it kind of separated a little bit. I might even steal over here a little bit more blue, make it a little tiny bit darker. And then here, I could also put a little darkness on this side. And that would kind of separate it a little bit more. And then maybe a little bit down here at the bottom, just like that. Can you see how that gives it a little bit more dimension? This green area. And then, of course, is that dry enough? I think it is. So now, that was inside the little petal itself. This might be too watery. A little bit more pigment that's a little thicker, so it won't run so much. Get a little bit of that yellow. Okay, so now I have a little bit of a darker green here. So here, on this bud here, the one that's underneath, if I put some of that darker green behind here, can you see it? So I just put that dark green around there. Obviously, that does not look very good. So now I do the same thing. I clean my brush out, dab it, clean water, just damp before it dries on me. Do that same thing in from the dry side, get that tip in here, and lose that edge. and down here into the brown. See how that, now that bud sticks out more. Dark pushes down, light brings forward. It's like a formula you can say to yourself. And yeah, so now there's a lot more dimension there. And you know, it's all depends on how crazy you want to go on this, how, you know, how much you want to. So I can even go in and do a little bit more. Can you see how that kind of kicks it up a notch, as Emil would have said. I don't know if you ever watched that. I haven't seen him for years, but it's a cooking show. And I'm just here, I'm also just having a little extra fun with putting a little bit more dark down at the corners and then just kind of losing the edge. It gives it more dimension, I find, right? On this part. But now I think I should probably not be quite so obsessed with that little area. Just leave that for now. We can always go in and put more detail, put more contrast in as we go. But I wanted to show you a couple of other things that are going on with some of these little, I don't know if you can see it in any of these here. But you know, like the flowers, they have these little things, and sometimes you can kind of see them in between here. And I painted them in here. So here's one little one that shows up. And it's basically just a little green thing in here. And just there. And I think, what else did I see? I have another little one there. And this is, again, if you don't really see them or you don't want to deal with that, you don't have to. But I just wanted to show you. It's kind of fun to get a little bit of a green in here. Can kind of, you know, because green and red, they are complementary colors. So there can be a little bit of that going on in there, and then probably down here it's just really dark. So, you know, we can start getting some of those little darks in. So that could be helpful sometimes.
You gonna show us how to do those?
Yes, but you know, they're not, that's too early.
It's too early now.
Yeah, it's too early. If we do them now, you know, and when we're not finished painting the actual petal, we'll be in trouble. So that's too early, but I will certainly show you that. And then, you know, we also still have to paint the branch and stuff, but I think, you know, we don't want to get those really darks in prematurely. I did it here a little bit, but you know, it's sticking out and it's not underneath some of the petals here. Once I start putting real darks underneath here, and then if I still have to go back in and work here, sometimes the pigment comes up and then it starts mingling in and you get mud, and I don't want that. So I'm going to control my urge to paint them because I kind of feel like it, but I know better. I know better. All right, so what else do we have going on here? So here, I'm beginning to paint this one and this one, where you kind of see them more from the side. These 2, 3, we're looking straight into them, right? And so that will be a lot of the stamens and all that stuff we see in our little picture here, and also can see on the drawing. But here, we're kind of like this one I already painted in, so you can see I painted it a little bit darker. And the same with this one here, because there we're seeing kind of like the outside of the petals, and they tend to be a little bit darker often, and they are in mine. So maybe I should go with a little bit of a bigger brush. So I have here, there's just 3 petals, so that's very easy. So I'm gonna go in, put a little water in, just like that, and then I'm gonna go in and get some of that little bit darker color. I mean, it's not dark, but it's a little bit darker. And there, I'm painting around these 2. That's gonna be green. Like there. Dabbed in some pigment, and then I cleaned out my brush, and then I'm just gonna pull it out. Of course, they do get lighter as we move up the petal. They get closer, they get more light here, and especially on that side. Yeah?
Do you find that losing the edge varies depending on the pigment you're using?
Yes, yes. It can vary. Some pigments are easier to lose the edge than others. I would say the non-staining colors, it's a little easier. They don't sink into the paper quite as much.
Yeah.
So that would be like the cobalt. The opera rose is not really a staining color, but the quinacridone red is, the yellow is. So, you know. But then the good thing about staining colors is that when you paint over it, the second and third layer you paint over it, they don't lift as easily because they're more into. So that's, you know, it's not like staining are bad and non-staining are good, or vice versa. It depends on what, you know, and sometimes we have to deal with a little drawback sometimes. So this whole thing inside here, I'm going to try and show you on this particular one. I'll show you a different method, minus, so it's this flower here, minus this petal. I already painted that little bit of the outside that you can see. And then we can see the inside of the flower. So let's see here. So I'm going to paint. So that thing is there, and that thing is there. All right, so I'm going to paint the inside of this whole flower in one go, and then later I'll break it up into petals. That's another method that you can use for painting. So it's like this. So I'm just going to give it a little bit of this pink, and it goes kind of like this, down here, out here. And there's also, I'm painting around the outside of that petal. Some of it is the outside. And you can see I always turn my paper around so that it's as easy as possible for me to get to where I want to paint, and so I don't hopefully stick my finger in wet paint. So here, so these, and then I'll split up these petals later. That's another way of doing it. So it all depends on what you prefer, and sometimes it'll depend on the subject matter you're painting, where, you know, whatever you find is more convenient and easy. All right, so then that whole inside, this part is what I painted right now. And now I'm gonna go in, because I think it's all, see how it's flat? I never like that. So now I rinsed out my brush and made it thirsty. A thirsty brush is a brush that's clean, and then you have squeezed all the water out of it. So it's thirsty. So the minute you touch it into wet paint, it soaks it up. Can you see that? Soaks it up. So I can make it a little lighter. And again, I cleaned it out, because once you do that, it has pigment in it. So there. The light's coming from there, so maybe even this one would be even lighter. And then I could, I think I still have the time, go in and maybe even a little bit like that. And I could go in, because I know it's going to be a little darker in here while it's still wet. You can only do this while it's still wet. And I made sure that my brush does not have too much water and pigment on it. It's like the same level of wetness / dryness as the paper. And there we have it. Can you see now I just kind of gave it a little bit more pigment there. And now I'll have to leave it alone and wait for it to dry, and then I can go in and finish it up. So there's one other thing here, let's see, that I could show. So here I haven't really told you which one is on top. It's right here, it's this area. See, this petal has kind of folded over on itself, and it has a couple of these little green things sticking out. And they're the same value. So if I want to say that this one is on top of that one, I have to darken this area. Otherwise you can't see it. So let me do it. Maybe a little brighter than I want. So I'm going to take a little bit of the blue and tone it down. So here, and I'm doing it wet on dry because it's a small area, but then you got to be quick when you do that. So here, and probably a little bit in here. There. Rinse out my brush and just drag the pigment out. And down here. Can you see that now you know that this one's on top and this one's below? This belongs to this flower, and it has kind of a weird shape because it's actually curled under a little bit. And let me just tell you that story. Because I can see a little bit of the back side of the petal here. And if I darken that even more, you can really see what's going on there. See, that'll be a lot darker because, you know, it doesn't get any light.
Yeah.
Can you see that now? Now you understand, hopefully, what's going on here. Hopefully, if I painted it well enough. But can you see that? And now you can see this petal that belongs to here, it's, you know, underneath. And I'll doctor these up so that I don't like to have such a big difference between the petals. So I'm going to go in, doctor this one up a little bit. And see, now I'm just putting a little bit of that kind of a lavender color right, you see, it's like a triangle, kind of right down there where all the petals come from, you know, the center of the flower. And then right away, drag it up, clean my brush, because, you know, you're not going to lose any colors with a dirty brush, so you got to clean it. There. Can you see? Now I'm beginning to build some depth in the flowers. And I'm not going to worry about, I decided already, we talked about it last time, I'm not going to worry about the fact that there will be some of those stamens that are going to be lighter. We're going to cheat. We could have gone in and masked them out, but I find those fine little stamens, you know, you mask them out and they become a little clumsy. So I think I'll use a different method, and I'm going to show you that one. But anyway, yeah. Any questions? Are you ready to tackle the last of those? And then we'll reconvene. Thanks for watching. Please go to part 3 to see this painting wrapped up.